respected District Governor Lion R.G. Balasubramaniam, our chief guest of today's great event, Sri MP Joseph IAS, my good friend and our second Vice District Governor Lion Joseph K. Manoj, District Cabinet Secretary Lion Attaudi, today's program coordinator and District Secretary Lion Advocate Kurian Anani, other Lion leaders, Lion luminaries, family members and friends. A warm good evening to one and all. I have great pleasure in this wonderful evening in welcoming each one of you. And I consider it as a privilege and honor to propose welcome address in this auspicious day, that is observing of UN Day. We know that United Nations Organization was formed on 24th October 1945 with the main object of establishing world peace, security, developing friendly relations, etc. between various nations in the world. On this day, the UN flag is flown along with the Indian flag on all important places in India.
Many among us who used to watch Doordarshan in the late 80s would remember with nostalgia a young, handsome and vibrant IAS officer anchoring programs for the youth. He was an inspiration to many of my generation. Today, it's my pleasant and proud privilege to introduce him to the Lions fraternity, Mr. MP Joseph IAS, former UN and Indian civil servant. MP Joseph belongs to the 1978 batch of Indian Administrative Service, Kerala cadre. In the previous year, he has been selected to the IPS and had completed his training in the Police Academy at Hyderabad. Mr. Joseph holds a master's degree in Human Resource Development from the Victoria University, Manchester, UK, and a master's degree in Solid State Physics from the Cochin University of Science and Technology. Joseph began his career in the IAS, winning the prestigious Renu Sandhu Gold Medal of the 1978 batch from the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Missouri. Mr. Joseph had an illustrious career in the IAS in Kerala cadre, starting his career in the state as sub-collector of Trichur and later moving on as district collector of Ernakulam, where he had the rare privilege of holding the charge of the mayor of the city of Cochin for 2.5 years concurrently. Many of the development works of this city were initiated during his tenure. He won the state government's award for the best performing district collector. Later, he was appointed as a Labour Commissioner of Kerala and holds the record for being the longest ever period for any Labour Commissioner in the state. As Labour Commissioner, he was the first one to introduce computers into work, at least one organization, and it was a breakthrough for the state since at that point of time, there was a stiff resistance from the trade unions against computerization. He was the CEO of the Headlord Workers Welfare Fund Board, which the board was constituted by him. During the first Gulf War, Joseph headed a team of Ministry of External Affairs that worked with the Indians fleeing from Kuwait through Iraq-Jordan border. As leader of the Government of India team, contributed to the safe return of 1 lakh of Indians fleeing the Iraqi invasion. The then LDF government of Kerala awarded him a special citation letter commending the excellent work done by him in the desert camps. Mr. Joseph joined the International Labour Organization, ILO, in the year 1992 and started up in India the ILO's program to fight child labor and promote school education. He spent over a dozen of years in the most rural and backward districts of the state, backward districts and states of the country, sensitizing parents, communities, employers, schools, and school teachers, educationists, trade union leaders, politicians, administrators, media, NGOs, etc., on the economic need for ending child labor and sending all children to schools in order to augment the human resource of the country. During the period, he worked closely with the government of India and with over 20 state governments as well as with persons like Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi, etc. International Program on Elimination of Child Labor of the ILO in India that Mr. Joseph set up has become global vehicle to end the child labor. The International Program of Elimination of Child Labor is not only ILO's biggest program, but also the world's largest program on child labor. He brought up the need to end child labor into public consciousness within India and molded opinion and attitudes on it from one of denial of child labor and its social acceptance to one of concern and need for change. His work led to funding of child projects in India from international and national agencies. His work and its impact has been highlighted not only in the discussions of Lok Sabha and many state assemblies, but even in the British House of Commons. MP Joseph's work in India touched the lives of many lakhs of children. His work is assessed as having directly ensured over 10 lakhs of poorest of poor children who could otherwise have been child laborers were admitted to schools and retained there. The indirect impact of his work would be many times that number. These children are today all economically independent young adults living across the country and well above the poverty line, who, but for Joseph's work on child intervention, would have still led a miserable life of deep poverty and illiteracy. The economic and social impact of his work is enormous. Later, Joseph moved to ILO in Cambodia. Joseph's work in Cambodia led the royal government of Cambodia to commit ending the worst forms of child labor by the year 2016, the first country in the Southeast Asia to do so. He has won the Cambodia's prestigious Saha Maitri Award from the Prime Minister of Royal Kingdom of Cambodia. Returning back to Kerala in 2012, after 2 decades of being away for 2 decades, he became the advisor of the government of Kerala on labor reforms, industry relations, and project financing. In that role, he conducted a detailed study of domestic migrant laborers in the state today. MP Joseph has written and published numerous articles and technical papers on variety of issues and a travelogue named My Driver to Long, which is based on his Cambodian experience. He has also published articles of topical interest in newspapers, etc. His recent articles in Malayalam Manorama on May Day on the problems of guest workers and variety of different topics in the week has attracted much thought and attention. Proficient in speaking about 8 languages, he is a much sought after speaker in English and Malayalam. He writes extensively in English and Malayalam. These days, he's a frequent speaker on webinars and Zoom on variety of topics of current interest. The young, handsome, graceful IAS officer whom we used to watch on Doordarshan, today seasoned with time and experience and as graceful as ever, has recently concluded Youth Express, a runaway hit program for the young people on Asianet News, and is actively present in social media and public platforms, leaving us to believe that as far as he is concerned, the best is yet to arrive. Ladies and gentlemen, with these words, it's my pleasant and proud privilege to present before you the guest speaker of the day, Mr. MP Joseph, IAS. Thank you.
Now it is time for us to hear from the horse's mouth. Over to Sri MP Joseph, IAS, for his keynote address.
Thank you so much once again for honoring me by asking me to participate in the observance of UN Day 2020 being organized by the Lions Club. It's an honor, it's a privilege. Thank you so very much. I understand that District 3118C comprises of over 100 Lions Clubs, covering the districts of Idiki, Ernakulam, and Alleppey, and has over 4,500 members. It's huge. It's tremendous. The reach is particularly wide. So once again, thank you so much for inviting me. Good to see so much participation from among members of the various Lions Club in the district. The many projects of the Lions Club has always had a human touch, which I think was no doubt said by your founder, Lion Melvin Jones. You would have been proud of what you're doing today in Kerala, in India, and the rest of the world. I know the work that many of the Lions clubs are doing in India, and especially in Kerala. You've been showing the way in how society can be transformed in quiet but very significant and sustainable ways. So it's a privilege, as I repeat again, to be with you this evening, especially when you are observing UN Day 2020. And I find it extremely satisfying that the Lions Club is one of the few, and perhaps, I don't know, perhaps the only social organization that observes UN Day, percolating the message of the UN to your members and through them to, I'm sure, the next generation. Especially at a time when the UN is largely taken for granted by many, which is of course a pity. It's good to see this sort of a work that is continuously done year after year after year by Lions clubs across the world. It is very heartwarming to see that interest, an interest that has been built into the system by the Lions Club. And that's very important because individuals may come and go, but if something is in the system, it continues. It augurs well for the Lions clubs. It augurs certainly well for the UN, for Kerala, for India, the world, and each and every one of us. Now, 75 years is a long time, not only for an individual, certainly for an institution. There are not many institutions that survive for 75 years. But the UN has done so. As Lion R.G. Subramaniam said, it was set up in 1945, after the end of the Second World War. Today, the UN has 193 member countries. Amongst the important countries of the world, or there are only 3 countries which are not there, not members of the UN, and that's Kosovo, Taiwan, and Vatican City. All the rest of the countries are part of the UN. The UN has been able to bring out a lot of changes. Many of the things that we accept today as commonplace was because of the role played by the UN in making them acceptable across the world. I'll list a few of them, you know it, but just for your reminder, environment concerns. The UNEP particularly has played a huge role in making you and me understand. There was a time when I was cynical about environment. I thought, what are we talking about? Universal education. We speak of education as a right of a child. We speak of universal education today. We talk of compulsory education today. We send all our children to schools. That is, the UN has played a key role in that. Children's rights, the CRC, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. As a child, I didn't even know I had rights. I'm sure that's the case with many of you. But today, every child knows, you and we adults also know that children do have rights. Before, when we were young, when our parents were young, when our grandparents were young, children were not even thought to be persons. They were there. They had no rights. They had duties, but they had no rights. But we have come to realize today, thanks to the UN, that children have rights. We also realized, and today we speak of human rights as though it has been there for all the time. No, it has been there for all the time, but it was the UN which made us realize that each of us, anybody who's born a human being, has a certain right, whether man, woman, third gender, child, anybody, a physically challenged person, a mentally challenged person, all of us have human rights, and that's what the UN did to us. Gay rights, it's something that we are becoming more and more aware of today. That just because you have been born different, you cannot be denied your rights. Fighting AIDS, we don't think of AIDS anymore. We are now thinking of COVID. But there was a time when everyone was scared of COVID. We were scared of AIDS. We wouldn't touch a person who we thought might have had AIDS. And today the UN has successfully fought AIDS, taking care of refugees. Refugees have always been a problem. Poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity anywhere. Why do refugees happen? Not only because of war, but also because of poverty. And the UN has been taking care of refugees. Lion Anthony Kurian Anthony also mentioned that I was there in the first Gulf War. I have seen how anybody can become a refugee. You and I can become a refugee. We don't realize it. The richest people from Kerala and other places in Kuwait suddenly became homeless. They came collecting whatever they could and crossing the desert. So it's good to see them eliminating child labor, labor reforms, development goals, and now the sustainable development goals that we have. And even concepts like 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of recreation, which is so much a part of our thinking, is because of an agency like the ILO, which is part of the UN. Who has not heard about the good work done by UNICEF, UNESCO, or for children? There used to be a time when New Year cards and Christmas cards were UNICEF cards. UNESCO on education and culture and heritage. WHO doing an excellent job today in the times of COVID. ILO in establishing global standards on and international laws on labor issues. UNAIDS, I spoke about that. UN Women on women's issues, gender equality, etc. There's so many of them. And towards development, from 2000 to 2015, we had the Millennial Development Goals, the MDGs. You might remember that. It may not have succeeded fully, but we traveled a long way. And today we have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which takes us even more forward. 60% of the UN's income is spent on development. And it has played a significant role in reducing poverty, reducing hunger. I'm not saying hunger has been destroyed, has been killed. It has reduced poverty. And today, this year, if the UNFPA, United Nations Food, UNFPA has won the Nobel Peace Prize, it's richly deserving because hunger in the world has come down. Poverty to an extent in the food grain availability has gone up. So these are very important successes of the UN. As Kurian said, Lion Kurian said, I wrote a book called My Driver Too Long. It is about, it's a fictionalized travelogue. It's part fiction, part autobiography, part short stories, part novel, part various things. Those who would like to know more about Cambodia, that's something to read. Now, moving on, I think while the UN has contributed so much to the world, there are also a few negatives. Now, you can't get over it because negatives, every institution has negatives. A lot of money, $60 billion are spent every year on 60 billion, spent every year on aid, but unfortunately, not every rupee reaches the poor person for whom it is intended. A lot of money is spent, needless to mention, on salaries, travel, office, and other part of bureaucracy. That's part of life. I mean, I'm not condoning it. I'm condemning it, of course, but it's something that we have to understand. There is also another system in the UN, which I think I should speak about, which I had touched upon earlier, which I suppose is, in a way, not fully democratic, especially when you speak of the 2020s, when we speak of 75 years. The veto power that is given to just 5 countries in the UN. Out of 193 countries, 5 countries, the US, UK, France, those 5 countries are alone given the right of veto, which is highly undemocratic. And that, in a world which is in the 21st century, in 2020, we cannot have systems that were perhaps necessary in 1945 when the Second World War ended. These 5 countries are the victors of the Second World War. So they were able to impose the veto power on the rest of the world, which may have been correct and good at that time, but I don't think it is correct and good any longer. And I think that's one of the things that when we look at 75 years and look forward, the UN might have to consider amending, consider changing. The Security Council itself has therefore to be revised. India, a country with 130 crores of people, 1.3 billion, is not represented permanently in the Security Council. We have to take our turns as non-permanent members. We don't have a veto power. That is no longer correct. There should be greater democracy in decision making within the UN and within the Security Council. So it is not right to exclude a country with 130 crores, the second largest population in the world, from decision making within the UN. And that reflects in many ways. Because of the veto power, for example, it is never possible for an Indian to become the Secretary General of the UN. Because you see, what has happened is that a country like China will use the veto power to prevent an Indian from becoming a Secretary General. We know how, we saw it a few years ago when Shashi Tharoor, a brilliant man, much brilliant than most of the Secretary Generals of the UN we have had. He could not win because of the veto power that was consistently used in the Security Council to prevent Shashi Tharoor, an Indian, from becoming the Secretary General. And Ban Ki-moon, I mean, I'm not critical of anybody, but there's a there's a huge difference between somebody like Shashi Tharoor up there and Ban Ki-moon in terms of everything, in terms of abilities. But Shashi Tharoor can't win because of this veto power that is exercised by the UN Security Council, which is sad. I think a person like Shashi Tharoor would have made a far greater, better Secretary General, would have made an extremely good Secretary General. And then, of course, that also, in a sense, works into the bureaucracy of the UN. The bureaucracy of the UN is also, it's unlike, for example, I'm from the civil service, Indian civil service. In the Indian civil service at 20 or 21 or 25, you write an exam. It's an all India exam. About 10, 11, 12 lakhs of young persons write it. And the best of the best, the people who have shown their mettle in writing the exam and in the interview are selected, maybe 100, 120. So you have the best in the Indian civil service, not so in the UN bureaucracy. The number of people in the 55,000 is selected on the basis of the annual contribution that is made to the UN by various countries. So because the US makes the biggest contribution, around 15 or 18%, 15 to 18% of the UN bureaucrats are from the United States. Then comes the Japan, which contributes is in the number 2 position. Then comes Germany and others, and the number of bureaucracy, the number of officers in the UN, UN's global civil service is dependent on the contribution of the country to the UN. India contributes 16 million, which is a pittance, and therefore we have very few. I mean, considering our population, considering that we have a wealth of talented young people, talented managers, we have shown that across in the corporate world, Pichai and so many others coming to the top of the corporate world, but an Indian cannot unfortunately come to the top of the UN bureaucracy.
And good evening, Mr. Joseph. My question is regarding the UN Human Rights Council, which is very much in use, maybe for the wrong reasons. We know that Russia, France, UK have been elected to the council, and Saudi Arabia, if I may say so, fortunately have been inched out. But countries like China, Cuba, and even Pakistan, who have a notorious record for human rights, have been elected into the council. How was it possible, or how is it possible? And what about India? Where do we stand? That's my question. Thank you.
I completely agree with you, Lion Prabhu. It's a contradiction that countries which have the poorest human rights record should be represented on the Human Rights Council. No, I mean, that's a sad part of it. When I pointed out to the weaknesses of the UN, these are the weaknesses of the UN. India has a very good track record of human rights, whereas the countries that managed to get in do not have this. It's sad. That is a weakness. I mean, there are many weaknesses, but on such an auspicious day like the 75th birth anniversary of the UN, I didn't want to go into many of the details I had noted down because there are many weaknesses, because I didn't want to make this a negative thing. But one of the weaknesses is exactly what you pointed out, Lion Prabhu, that here is a system that's electing and sending countries which have a proven track record of complete negation of human rights getting into the council. Isn't that sad? And that's the whole point I'm trying to make, that we need 75 years is a long time, but we need the ILO, the UN to survive not only for the next 75 years, but many years more. And for that to happen, we should restructure the UN, is my point. Point well taken, Lion Prabhu. Thank you so much for that question. This is a sad outcome of international global politics. It shouldn't happen.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
See, I have a question, sir. The 2020 Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the World Food Programme, WFP, a UN agency for its efforts to combat hunger, bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and preventing use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. Very noble effort from UN. Sir, as we know, we are into the world of COVID pandemic situation. People across the world is losing jobs. The people who are doing business is finding difficult to run the business and in a trauma situation, and people are moving into the depression. In such a situation, and suicide rates are increasing, in such a scenario, how UN can help the citizens across the world to come out of this situation?
I would completely agree with the Nobel Peace Committee that the WFP deserved to get the Nobel Peace Prize, because hunger is something that thankfully we have not really been affected by. We have not experienced, at least people, you and I talking. But hunger is something despicable. Imagine not having food for 2 days, 3 days. Imagine children starving and dying. To reach on the one hand, and then food rotting, people throwing away and wasting food on the other hand. So the WFP has done an extremely good job of trying to get food to the hungry. It's very important. Feeding the hungry is the greatest act of kindness that you can do. So that way, what the WFP has done is tremendously great, and I should compliment it. I would completely agree with the UN Peace Committee for selecting the WFP for this Nobel Peace Prize 2020. But your other point is also valid. We are facing a situation about which nobody has a clue. Hunger is reappearing in the world. Hunger is becoming a very serious issue in India because people are losing jobs. People don't have money. People don't have money to buy food. Why I would say that hunger is going to reappear in Kerala also very soon. We thought we are above all this, but the Gulf remittances have come down. Our economy is sliding down. Hunger will reappear if we are not able to control this. And when hunger reappears, that is one part of it. The second part is the feeling of helplessness. You lose your job, you don't know what to do. Your business is getting 1/10 the money that it used to get, 1/20th or 1/5. You have no clue what to do. I'm sure there are many families today in Kerala, and of course, certainly in India, who just don't know how to get on. I mean, what will they do if this continues for 2 months, 3? Maybe they're not talking about it, but it's depressing them. It's leading to suicides, as you said. And I think there's a need for us to respond to it. I do not know how competent the UN is to respond to these situations, but it is very important that they develop the competence very quickly, because it is not the problem of Kerala alone. It's not the problem of India alone. It's a global problem. They need to quickly develop the competencies for it. And that is very important. And at the same time, an agency where I work, the International Labour Organization, has to start thinking how to get jobs to the people, how to ensure that people start earning with small amounts. These are very serious. Otherwise, I think the impact of COVID would be felt much more, not in terms of the death from COVID, but from the death that happened because of COVID, not the disease, but the economic, human, and other factors that happens because of it. This is exactly what happened in Cambodia. The actual number of killings by Cambodia's Khmer Rouge was maybe X number, but the death because of hunger, depression, etc., was many times that. So I think it's very important. It's a very thing the UN should emerge, should quickly put in place a system by which all such factors can be addressed. Very important.